Good evening, Facebook world, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Bare Your Soul. Tonight, we're joined by Ryan Glatt, who is a personal trainer, brain health coach with 10 years of experience. He also has a vast level of experience working with populations of various neurological conditions and uses this gained knowledge to consult with tech companies seeking to enhance physical activity with cognitive training. He's recently released the Brain Health Trainer course, which is the first comprehensive course released on the topic of brain health and exercise. Welcome, Ryan, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Absolutely. I've been waiting to do this for a while now. We've definitely gotten close over the last year or so and have enjoyed some great conversations about your subject matter and your world and how we can combine it with Naboso and join it and work together. And I'm excited to continue that relationship and also to pick your brain a little bit tonight and see what we can educate the rest of the population on with what you're doing out there.
No pun intended with the pick your brain.
No pun intended at all, I swear.
A pun received.
Right, there you go. So maybe you can give us a little bit of background on exactly what it is that you're doing in your world right now and how you're differentiating yourself from what's already out there.
Sure. So my background is in personal training. I somewhat became bored and disinterested with the standard approaches to fitness and health. And both because of my personal journey, my family, and the state of the world and where it's going with the major health issues that we're facing of the mind and brain, for example, cognitive impairment and mental health, my interest has turned towards interventions that can help ameliorate cognitive decline, prevent dementia, and improve brain health overall. I wouldn't categorize myself in like the biohacking functional medicine community, but I'd say I'm really interested in the translation of evidence-based and somewhat evidence-based practices that are free or low-cost tools and translating those to the general public, primarily through educating health and fitness professionals, because I'm less about being a sage on a stage and preaching to the general public about brain health and calling myself an expert. Many people would look at me like an expert, but I do not feel like one. Instead, I'm trying to represent exercise, this intervention that the fitness industry is delivering, and positioning that as an intervention for brain health, in which many people have come to understand exercise as healthy for your brain, but essentially summarize it as a secondary side effect of exercise and do not get specific. Yet we have this massive area of biohacking, functional medicine, and other interventions that get very detailed, very nuanced. Yet when we talk about exercise and brain health, it's very general. And some of the things that some of the metaphors I'll give are, if I just said food is good for you and you should eat it, you would be very confused. Yet somehow we just say exercise is good for you and you should do it, and that flies.
Right.
A nutritionist might be very specific about macronutrients, micronutrients, supplementation, timing, type, all of these variables. Yet once again, with exercise, we're extremely general. And as it relates to brain health, the World Health Organization rates the different interventions that have the most evidence weight from the most confidently weighted interventions to the least. And exercise is at the very top, but it's talked about the very least, or it's talked about last, where I work at the Pacific Brain Health Center, or just individuals I'll talk to in general on social media or in person, they've been exposed to supplementation and red light therapy and ozone therapy and hyperbaric oxygen chambers. And not that those things are bad, but they're definitely not my first line of defense. And I get a lot of alternative medicine survivors, of people that spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and they're like, it didn't really work for my specific complaint, but they don't have their basics, such as exercise and sleep hygiene, under control. And so as it relates to the health and fitness industry, I'm sort of crusading for the communication of research that is there but does not translate to practice, and trying to being one of these health and fitness professionals that wants to do more with their career and make a deeper impact, trying to provide tools and resources for other professionals that are in the same boat and want to help people with what's between their ears and not just below their neck. So that's sort of what my focus is.
Okay. And now maybe can you tell us about some of the tools that you use in applying this and in trying to get this information out?
Yeah, so there's different levels that might apply these tools. There's like the general free low-cost tools, which are just creating what I call a brain-healthy exercise prescription, which is if you look at ACSMs, or not, ACSM does get into a bit more specificity. That's the American College of Sports Medicine. But the general recommendation for exercise is 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous, usually aerobic is thrown in there, exercise. So 150 minutes to moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise. That is a very good prescription for most people. Yet there's this emergence of literature, especially when we're talking about the effects on brain health of resistance training, functional training, mind-body exercises like Tai Chi, Pilates, and yoga, and things like open skills. And open skills are things like tennis, martial arts, which I know you're a big proponent of, dance. And so all of these things are important. And for simplicity's sake, we might boil those into three categories: aerobic training, in which there's many different subdomains; resistance training, which you can throw around a kettlebell or a mace, or you can be doing an exercise machine at a very fixed position. That's more closed skill because you don't need to think about it. Right. And then there's more skill-based exercise, in which we might have two distinct categories. We might have the more mind-body practices, which are lower intensity, things like Tai Chi, Qigong, Pilates, as I've mentioned, and things that are more higher intensity, dance, sports, martial arts. All of those three categories, I believe, are equivalent to the macronutrients of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And most of the time, people are focusing in aerobic exercise, especially with the prevalence of high-intensity interval training. Many people are selecting that as their primary modality of exercise, or just selecting resistance training as their primary modality of exercise. But what I'm looking at, or what I'm kind of gathering from the research, is that at least for healthy adults and even healthy older adults, a multi-component training program in which you have a little bit of each of them might be best. Now, because our society is so focused on physical outcomes, we bias ourselves in one modality. And it makes sense, because if it's fat loss, the repeated modality is likely to be aerobic, although we know the different, we know resistance training to be helpful. But if it's muscle gain, we're primarily going to spend time in resistance. Why would you play basketball to gain muscle, right? That doesn't make sense. But if the goal was brain health, in which now it's more prevalent than ever, if people, even like you or I, are probably interested in maintaining our brains over the muscle mass of our quadriceps, right? We do care about how we look and feel. Right. But we go to work every day with our brain. We wake up, we interact with our friends and our families and our coworkers and our clients with our brains. We live with our brains. Our value is essentially boiled down to our cognitive function. Absolutely. In many ways in current society. So therefore, why would you not focus your exercise program to be focused on those outcomes? Right. No,
that's great. Yeah. And now
that's what I talk about first, because I get into some really interesting stuff with technology and virtual reality and motor training, but I almost disqualify that stuff until we have this conversation first, which was take the free tools that are or low cost that are aware of, that just need to be manipulated to create this exercise program that would be better for your brain health. That's where I like to start.
Awesome. And now would you say that now, all right, so if they say 150 hours a week, right, for the average person, now would you divide, or minutes, sorry, 150
That would be a lot.
That would be a lot. You wouldn't sleep.
So likely not healthy, no.
Okay, 150 minutes a week. Now, would you take that and now, so you're saying separate that out and do maybe 3 days worth or 90 minutes of aerobic, right? And then the other 2 days or other 30-minute sessions, you would do resistance and this open.
Right. So it's like 2 to 3 days per week per modality.
Right. So that you're switching it up.
Exactly. That's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
Another way of looking at it is that would be assuming each of those individual sessions are 30 to 60 minutes of that one modality for that day.
Right.
That's a great way to look at it. And some people feel that's helpful logistically to kind of parse it out like that. Great, I can go to my jiu-jitsu class Saturday and Wednesday, and I can do, kind of like that, right? They schedule out very simply. Another way of doing this, especially even without gyms, because just today, at least for California, Newsom announced the gyms are closing down again. So talking about gyms again in this context probably isn't the most helpful. But whether it's a gym or at home, many people find it useful for their time to focus on multiple modalities. This is what's called multimodal or multi-component training, where, for example, I might do 30 minutes of aerobic exercise, whether it's body weight, HIIT training, or a circuit, or an exercise bike for 30 minutes, and then proceed to 30 minutes of resistance training. That knocks both out in one session.
Right.
But you're getting 60 minutes total of that intervention. So that's another way of looking at it. You could even be more specific and go 20 minutes aerobic, 20 minutes resistance, and 20 minutes of skill-based, whatever that skill-based is. And you could even combine them. Well, what if my resistance is skill-based? What if I'm focusing my resistance training on loaded mace flows or viper flows or kettlebell work in 3 dimensions or animal flow or anything of that regard? If it's novel, if it's cognitively demanding, and if it requires your attention, it is likely skill-based. And if, you know what I'm saying? So you can combine them in that way.
Right.
So that's one way of looking at it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we just moved out to Arizona. So now, we were stuck in New York for the whole time during COVID, for the majority of it. And we were restricted basically to a 600 square foot apartment. Our gym was shut down. It's very tough. It's not like you can just go outside and lift weights in New York City. Like you really end up restricted. So my routine ended up getting very restricted. And I fell out of not only my routine, but out of my fitness self because of this restriction to what I could do. And I tried to be creative. We tried to do different things, but it's very tough when you have a baby and you have this little apartment. So we did what we could. But now we're in Arizona and I'm like, all right, every day we have a pool. So I do 20 minutes of heavy, strenuous work in the pool. Utilizing the resistance of the water to create an aerobic environment for myself so that I'm winded and I'm going. It's not deep enough to do laps. So I've basically figured out ways to recreate that level of output in the water. And then we have the mace and ab routines and then now that I'm back out here, going to start heavily going into martial arts again and really doing my training again. So then that's, I feel like from what you're saying, that's a good mix of everything kind of.
Yeah, that sounds like it. Yeah, exactly.
So are
you a weightlifter? Are you a big resistance training guy?
I do love my weights. I mean, I'm a kind of a wide, bigger dude, so it's natural for me. When I lift, I bulk up really fast though. So I literally within a couple of weeks, I gain so much muscle. It's just I'll just literally expand. I think it's just
nice problem to have.
I don't know about that. Not when you're trying to I want to be thick, not I don't want to be a big meathead, but it's kind of my genetics to just I'm a little bit of a shorter dude, but just broad. So it's just when I lift, I just get even broader. It's I want to actually be fit and be a little more trim. So it's more difficult, and I have to work more on my aerobic side of things in order to burn those calories and get that
right down. So in that case, maybe lighter weights with more 3-dimensional movement that feel more skill-based or martial arty, if you will, might be a better fit for you if that was your goal, right? And the idea there is that there is a neurobiology, at least neurobiological theory underpinning what I'm saying, which is for aerobic exercise, when we get out of breath and we go above our resting level heart rate, there are various things that happen. There's what I call the micro level, in which things like growth factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, are released. There's another growth factor called vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, which literally grows the diameter and the number of blood vessels in the brain. There's other ones like IGF or insulin-like growth factor 1. There's all these growth factors, molecules, and proteins, but also hormones and neurotransmitters that can become released. At the more macro level, brain activity, and at least over time, say several weeks or months, brain volumes can actually change. So this is where you read articles like, oh, aerobic exercise increases the size of the hippocampus, which is a part of your brain responsible for learning and memory. But then resistance training, at least the cognition improvements in older adults that do resistance training, according to some studies, are primarily mediated by changes in strength and also muscle mass. So the production of muscle mass and cross-sectional hypertrophy seems to produce other growth factors. So where aerobic exercise might produce more BDNF, maybe resistance training is producing more IGF-1, but also you have the upregulation of things like testosterone, right? So there's different metabolic and energetic underpinnings of both of them. But and those are more indirect, meaning they're affecting the brain and cognition positively in an indirect way along metabolic and energetic pathways. But when we do skill learning, you really have to think directly. You have to coordinate and anticipate. And this is especially true probably in your martial arts experience. If you do not focus, you are screwed. So you need to focus, you need to think ahead, you need to react, you need to know where your body is in space. You're in a much different place than when you're in the pool or you're on an exercise bike, right? And so that is a more direct, we call that motor fitness, MOTOR. And so that's why it's important to have a combination of those things, because if we're acting on all these different pathways, you have the best fighting chance of a healthy brain.
Right.
We would think, right? Because we talk about this concept called cognitive reserve, which is like a gas tank for your brain. Where that comes from, it's these studies like the nuns study. I don't know if you've heard of the nuns study, where they dissected the brains of these nuns. And they had the pathology of Alzheimer's, amyloid plaques and tangles, but they were fine. Behaviorally, they were fine. They had no symptoms of Alzheimer's, right? So this nun study is like, oh, well, the structure of the brain can change, but the function was dependent on what we can call their environmental enrichment. They were always learning. They were socially active. They were engaged in spirituality. You don't think of nuns doing CrossFit, but I guess they were fit. They were moving around a lot. I don't know.
I went to school the majority of my educational life, and those nuns, yeah, oh yeah, those nuns were in some of the best shape I've ever seen. Older women of that age.
Oh wow!
They were always fit, and they were always like they had their little jogging sneakers, and they would do laps around the property at the school.
There you go. I had no idea.
They were always.
Where was this that this happened? Yeah. Where was this?
So I went to school at a little Catholic school called Holy Angels in New Jersey, and it was a great school. I got a great education. I had some great classmates. But really, the staff there of teachers, which was predominantly nuns, they were excellent. I mean, they were on point. I mean, we had, I think, just within the last couple of years, my second grade teacher, Sister Rupert was her name. She was literally my uncle's teacher in second grade when he was a child, and she was my second grade teacher. And I heard that she was still going strong. I mean, this woman was like, kind of shaky and elderly when I had her. And I heard just like maybe, within the last 10 years, she finally retired and passed. But, she went for decades and decades and decades. Yeah. She was also brutal. She would pull out a ruler if she had to back in the day. It was not fun. You didn't piss Sister Rupert off. It was not fun.
Yeah. So you have firsthand evidence that people probably have a lot of cognitive reserve, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
This cognitive reserve, it's a hypothesis. You can't, measure directly your cognitive reserve, but that includes cognitive stimulation, social stimulation, healthy diet, exercise, the controlling of various risk factors, good, generally good sleep, being outside, exposure in nature. It's all these things we think are important, but also in there is learning new things and novel experiences. And so when we look at those things, when we look at socialization, novelty of experience, and we also look at learning new things, we usually talk about those three things outside the context of exercise. And exercise is just one contributing factor of cognitive reserve. But what if our exercise consisted, as well as exercise, of cognitive stimulation, novel experience, learning new things, and socialization?
Right.
That theoretically make a stronger dose response from that exercise to improve cognitive reserve. And what early animal research is showing, they call this an enriched environment, is that yes, an enriched environment is superior to a non-enriched environment. And with human studies, where it compares this more enriched form of exercise that incorporates a cognitive demand compared to, let's call it normal exercise, that it either has equivalence or it is superior in some cases for improving cognition.
Right.
So while we can't say definitely, like with everything, more research is needed, but there's definitely some evidence there that this might be helpful and perhaps superior, depending on the population. Now, if we knew that, even if we have a lick of evidence that is true, we might want to try having our exercise programs incorporating some cognitive demand.
Yeah.
It makes sense, right?
And it doesn't hurt, right? No matter what, it doesn't hurt. So
it doesn't hurt unless it physically causes injury or you absolutely hate it.
Right.
Yeah. If you absolutely hate it, because what happens is parents might get a lick of this evidence and start to enroll their kids in martial arts when they don't want to be there. They're not going to enjoy. If they don't enjoy it, they're not going to get the cognitive benefits.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Right? What's that?
I said, suck it up, Buttercup.
There's some different philosophies, but there has been some very small studies taking kids that do Taekwondo. One group enjoys it and the other group does not enjoy it. And they looked at the output of their executive functions. The group that did not enjoy it got worse executive functions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now, could that teach them valuable things like discipline and you don't always get things your way? And yeah, that could be valuable, but that's not those psychological perspectives or skills were not measured. Right. It was actually executive functions, which are really valuable or thought to be valuable for academic success and professionalism and professional success in the future, right? So if the goal was to use something like martial arts, which usually has this discipline, hard ass sort of appeal to it, but the goal was to use it for its cognitive appeal. The fact that it is cognitively demanding and you enjoy it, what would be the output, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, these, what captures exercise and cognitive stimulation perfectly, in my opinion, is sports and dance and martial arts, but they have these overtones of competition and that might override their benefits due to cortisol or psychological stressors, right? Or overtraining to the extent where you're no longer doing it for health, you're doing it for victory, right? I'm not saying that's bad, because that also requires a high level of cognitive performance, but it might lose its value for the general public. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I understand that completely. I mean, for me, like the martial arts that I did all throughout my life, they were not competitive martial arts. They were true, like, self-defense martial arts. You didn't like, you sparred, but the sparring was more for learning, not for competition. Right. And that's really what it was about. So I understand that completely, because once you put that in, it does take it away from being something that you reflect upon more. Like, I trained to learn. I didn't train to go and like compete and, oh, I'm the best at this, or I got to win this match, or it wasn't about that. It was just, I got to go to class every day and I literally got to focus on what I was learning. And the fitness aspects of it, the structure of it, the discipline of it, and the formation of it is what was important, not, okay, how am I going to prepare for this fight, or how am I going to prepare for this competition? No.
Sure. And then some of the other mitigating factors would be like, okay, if we experience concussions, that may not be for brain health, right? Which is very common among sports and martial arts is concussions. And I work with a lot of people post-concussion syndrome, and that's not helpful for cognitive research.
Right. Yeah, of course.
So there's a lot of conflicting perspectives on that.
Right.
But I think especially now with COVID-19, people might understand that sports and martial arts and dance are all things that have these, if they do have these cognitive aspects to it, we can't really do them right now.
Right. Yeah, and that's difficult.
It's like if you couldn't get a certain food that you knew to be very valuable, you would have to supplement.
Right.
So I think the question now is, how do we supplement the cognitive benefits we might get from those modalities during these times?
Right.
And that's been something of interest for me for a while now, because it's not just having to do with COVID. It's what about if people don't have the time, money, or interest in any of those things, which
Right.
I think the majority of the population probably doesn't. I can't just, you might find this is the case when you try to impose your interests of martial arts onto other people. It's just not there for everybody.
Right. No, obviously not.
But what you got out of it, which was the learning, the fitness, the challenge, those non-physical components, that's not weight reps and sets. Right. Those are non-physical components that enrich that experience for you. So how can we take those psychological variables and apply them to our exercise routines? Mm-hmm. So what I try to do with my course, the Brain Health Trainer course, is teach personal trainers how to add on cognitive demands to their exercise techniques. That's one of the things I teach after teaching about this exercise prescription for brain health. And so if we were to do that, it might include things like, if we're going to do left, right, or multi-directional lunges, why not map those lunges to numbers or colors or external cues and call them out at random like we would martial arts drills, right? Or just like football players might have speed, agility, and quickness drills that are cognitively demanding and rely on visual and auditory cues. Why would we not do that in a general fitness setting? So that's one aspect of it. And when we do these things, sometimes we just use, fingers or audible cues or physical implements like speed, agility, quickness information, or speed, agility, quickness equipment, or colored dots or something in that regard. Mm-hmm. Or apps. There's apps out there like Clock Yourself or Switched On that older adults and athletes alike are using to create cognitive stimuli that is randomized and delivered digitally for a response to be had with a movement. And so these things, they're very early, these technologies, which means there's not a ton of research, but usually, especially when used properly, they adhere to principles that we're seeing in this early research that this may be valuable.
Right.
And so that's kind of my interest right now. Now, there's not a lot, because it's so new, there's not a lot of resources out there. And because it's so new, some of the a certain percentage of the resources out there are not very good, meaning they're not tested. They don't maybe like, oh, well, if brain and body go together, then this equals this. And they just kind of do it and preach that. It's very general. It's not rigorous. And so that needs to change. I like to think I could maybe help to be a part of that in certain ways. I don't think I'm going to provide that for the rest of the world. I really want to focus on creating a standard of education within our industry about it and let other smarter people come in. There's also equipment, like larger, more expensive equipment like cardio machines and functional training devices like SmartFit, which I know you're familiar with, that can go into clinics and gyms that can display these cognitive tasks that you interact with while you exercise. Right. So that this cognitive physical training thing is sort of the next layer beyond so the first layer was the exercise prescription in general. The second layer was incorporating more skill-based demands. And then that third layer is sort of injecting artificially cognitive stimuli into movement. And there's many ways to refer to that. You could call it dual tasking, cognitive motor dual tasking, brain body training, cognitive physical exercise, combined cognitive physical interventions. There's not a lot of shared terminology yet, but this is something that's new and upcoming in the industry and in research.
Awesome. Well, you touched on a couple of the things that I wanted to ask you about as we were wrapping up, but let me ask you just one final thing. Obviously, we're with Naboso Technology. So how have you integrated that, if you have at all? Have you integrated Naboso at all into any of these practices that you're talking about and discussing? And how have you done that?
Yeah, so I guess to simplify that, there's for this conversation, let's say there's 3 types of dual tasking. Dual tasking being the concurrent performance of 2 separate tasks. So cognitive motor dual tasking would be I'm jogging in place while counting backwards by 7s. That's a very primitive example, right? There's a cognitive task, the physical task. They're simultaneously executed and they're completely unrelated. I don't need to do either to accomplish the other, right? That's a cognitive motor. Then there's motor dual tasking. In motor dual task would be 2 motor tasks. Say juggling on a unicycle, that's a motor that's a motor dual task, right? Or just walking around the apartment while I bounce a ping pong ball on a paddle. I was doing that yesterday for fun, right? And that's a motor dual task. Then there's a sensory motor dual task. And I sort of made that one up. There's not a lot of that in the evidence.
Right.
But when we look at vestibular, so walking with vestibular demands, walking with visual demands, walking with some sort of proprioceptive demand, right? This is how I have leveraged Naboso in the past, where I've had certain clients with diabetic neuropathies, or I've had people with Parkinson's or MS. Not all of them, but some of them utilize Naboso, or even myself, doing things like a Viper flow, right, which is actually a cognitive motor sensory task, right, to a degree. It's hard to separate these things because they are truly integrated most of the time. That's the times in which I would use it, in which there is a additional sensory input that I might believe to be valuable. And that could differentiate the outcome. It could make it harder or it could make it easier, in which I have put people on a power plate during these cognitive motor dual tasks, and it's much harder because it's an interference.
Right.
But sometimes, for when I've used Naboso personally, and I'm doing some sort of Viper flow, and I'm doing it barefoot on a Naboso mat versus barefoot on a wooden surface, I do feel a little bit more connected, and it's actually easier for me. Perhaps because of the ground reaction force modification, or just because I like the feeling and the sensation. So I think there's this cognitive sensory motor relationship is to be explored. And I think when we're looking at things like gait or walking, which is a complex process, it will be interesting to observe how that plays a role.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate your time with us tonight. This has been absolutely eye-opening and mind-opening for sure. I want to make sure that everybody gets to understand where they can find you, your research, your program, for sure, the Brain Health Trainer course. I want to make sure everybody knows. So if you could shout all that out for everybody before we take off, I would appreciate that.
Sure. So if you want to find me on Instagram, where you can view all my professional modeling pictures, obviously I'm a fitness model on the side. If you can. Right. So you can find me at glatt.brainhealth. So glatt.brainhealth on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter because I'm very lazy with social media. And then the other places to learn more would be if you're a health and fitness professional, or you know of one, or you're just downright interested in this stuff, you can go to brainhealthtrainer.com. So brainhealthtrainer.com. Or if you want to contact me directly or learn more about the other ADHD-based business activities I'm involved in, you can find me at ryanglatt.com.
Awesome. Ryan, thank you again for joining us tonight. Facebook, thank you for joining us both.
Thank you, Facebook.
Again. And
Facebook.
Talk to you soon, Ryan. Great
Thanks,
to talk.
Michael.
Thank you, brother.
Bye-bye.
Bye.